use Occidental discourse regarding the Orient as dictated by the will to domination over Occidental peoples and territories. Hence, even the colonizers' endeavor to pursue knowledge of the colonized territories is contaminated. There, the relationship between cultures is unequal, and furthermore, the knowledge gained is devoted to the colonizer's strategy of administrating the colonized. This renders the kind of knowledge associated with, for instance, even Sir William Jones as suspicious. Thus, Orientalism functions in the service of the hegemony of the Occident over the Orient. The Orient is manufactured as the Occident's inferior other. It also manufactures the Occident's self-image as the privileged race, class, and culture. This is enabled by representing the East-West differences through the construction of stereotypes. Thus, the difference is codified and rendered rigid. According to Sade, the said discourse constructs the Orient as feminine, irrational, inarticulate, backward, and sensual. The Occident is characterized as rational, forward-looking, democratic, and masculine. This distortion is still at work when such virtues as longevity and spirituality are ascribed to the Orient. Edward Said's analysis is primarily centered in the Muslim Middle East world, but it stands as well for the entire imperialized cosmos in its generalities. His range is comprehensive enough. I quote, "I set out to examine not only scholarly works, but also works of literature, political tracts, journalistic texts, travel books, religious and philological studies. My hybrid perspective is broadly historical and anthropological, unquote. Orientalism, page 23. In the succeeding works, Edward Said indulged in a reappraisal of his practice of colonial discourse, analysis, and the relevant methodology. He was closest to Michel Foucault, albeit not uncritically, in his Orientalism. Even in the problem of textuality, two exemplary positions, also published, like Orientalism in 1978, Said expressed disapproval of sundry aspects of the Foucaultian discourse and methodology. The essay was revised and published as Criticism Between Culture and System in 1983. It further fell away from discourse theory. Theoretically, the shift from the Foucaultian perspective orchestrated in Orientalism is much more conspicuously discernible in such Saidian pieces as Orientalism Reconsidered, published 1985, Foucault and the Imagination of Power, published next year, 1986, to achieve a virtual crescendo in his Culture and Imperialism, published 1993. In the last mentioned text, instead of the Foucaultian discourse, it is Antonio Gramsci who is lauded as a seminal theorist. James Clifford, Robert Young, and Dennis Porter published impressive critiques of Orientalism right at the outset of the last decade. Edward Said stood indicted on several counts. Contradictions, it was alleged, thrived in the text of Orientalism. Said was accused of mixing up Marxian theory of culture with its episteme of the repressive nature of power, with Foucaultian formulations that herald language and discourse as the privileged factors of social reality, since Foucault envisioned power as arbitrary, impersonal, and de-centered. Sade had wedded Foucaultian anti-humanism with Auerbachian humanist tradition. It was felt that Saidian dialectics has not fructified into a synthesis. Auerbach and Gramsci could not be convincingly yoked with the Foucaultian episteme. Clifford branded it as, to quote him, a hermeneutic short circuit. Edward Said somehow is not alive to the distinction in material practices and politics of imperialism and discursive Orientalism. At one place, he locates the tradition of Western representations of the East as existing prior to Bonaparte's conquest of Egypt, but at another he reverses the trend and envisions the former as the outcome of the latter. The author tends to pursue the discourse theory when he opines that the Orient is a construction. Still, at another time, he says that the Orient has been misrepresented by the Occident, which implies the conception of the former in material terms by the latter, and furthermore a place that existed before the Occidentalist arrived to misrepresent it. Occasionally, Saidian devices fail to coalesce, since he brings together Gramsci, apart from Foucault, and humanism, as well as anti-humanism. This is evident in his division of Orientalism into latent and manifest, reminiscent of Roman Osipovich Jakobsonian linguistic concept of binary opposites that was so dear to the structuralists. It also recalls other twofold divisions. Karl Marx's base and superstructure, Ferdinand de Saussure's linguistic division into langue and parole, and Sigmund Freud's conscious and unconscious, also latent and manifest in his interpretation of dreams. Saidian terms stand for deep and surface structures of Orientalism. Deep structure stands for the imperialist divide, the will to power, and the political positionings. Surface structure denotes national tradition, individual scholarship, or cultural work. Orientalism proclaims the determining influence of the deep over the surface, the latent dictating the manifest. On occasions, the text does not bear with this dichotomous envisioning of relationships. If we apply latent manifest dichotomy to reading the texts embroiled in Orientalism, the non-coalescence of Sadian devices is rendered obvious. Sade explains latent Orientalism as follows, I quote, "It is clear, I hope, that my concern with authority does not entail analysis of what is hidden in the Orientalist text, but analysis rather of the text's surface, its exteriority to what it describes. I do not think that this idea can be overemphasized. Orientalism is premised upon exteriority," unquote, Orientalism, page 20. Edward Sade orchestrates